Well, wait, I have a question.
Wait, should I stop the recording?
No.
Okay. What's the
So
question?
if Sarita went to a very nice event and that's why she wasn't at the board meeting, so a baby got born or something?
Her daughter gave birth to twins
Oh, wow.
Okay.
in Iowa.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear about because that
Right.
sounds
That's
great.
that's where they are. That's where they were. They drove out there to be there. They knew it was going to be. It was scheduled. They made it. A scheduled birth, and thank God everybody's healthy, and two cute twin baby girls are now here in the world with us, and it's happy for everybody.
This is nice.
Yeah, very nice. Very, very nice. So they're out there. They're out there busy.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's the good news for sure. All right. So here we are.
And one more thing. Zohar's canceled tonight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
So now the Torah portion. The Torah portion is Re'eh. And that's see, look, open your eyes. And that's on page 1061 in our Eitz Chaim Chumash. And this is chapter 11 in Deuteronomy, verse 26. That's where it starts at. Chapter 11, 26. And Re'eh is a very, very, very complicated and full Torah reading. And it goes all the way to chapter 16, 15, 16, definitely 15. Does it go to 16? Yes,
Yeah.
It goes to 16 also, to the middle of chapter 16. So from the middle of chapter 11 through the middle of chapter 16, and it touches on a number of very interesting topics. It has, according to the traditional mitzvah counters, the people that try to figure out how do you count up the 613 commandments, that's the traditional number. So where are they? What counts as a commandment and so on? We're not going into that. You had a chance to study that when we did the Sunday morning Sefer HaChinuch series. But anyway, the traditional accepted number is that there are 55 commandments in the book, in the chapter, in the Torah portion Re'eh, right? So that's much more than proportionally than a Torah portion should have. If there are 54 Torah portions and 613 commandments, so what is it? 12 mitzvot a portion is about the average. Of course, that average is not really accurate because the whole book of Genesis, the whole first of the 5 books of the Torah have very few commandments because it's all stories. So the commandments don't really start coming in. Maybe the whole book of Breshit maybe has, less than 10 commandments. And then when we get into Shmot, we have stories. Then we get into some very, important commandments and a lot of commandments, Passover and so on. So when you think about 55 commandments in the Torah portion, that's way, it's 5, 6, 7 times what a Torah portion, on average would have. So it's a lot. It's really scrunched in quite densely. And let's also just take into account the fact that we're in Devarim, right? We're in the book of Deuteronomy. This is Moses talking. So where have all these commandments been? If he hadn't decided to, go through a whole review of the Torah, where would all of these commandments, have been found? But this is the way they're presented. This is how they're presented, and there's a lot of them here. The Torah portion begins with exhortations and with Moses, again, trying to preach and convince us that this is really, really important. We're going into this new land. It's going to be very challenging. Don't abandon God. There's a blessing and a curse. I'm putting the blessing and the curse before you. and I wrote in the Torah Sparks a little bit about it. It's really up to us. What are we going to do? We have a blessing and a curse together. So he then says that we have to, in our concern, not to be led astray and not to abandon God. We have to be very firm in how we treat the local population and the local culture. So starting in chapter 12, we have this idea that we should destroy all of the idolatrous shrines, all the idols, the altars, all of the places that were used for idol worship. They all have to be completely smashed and destroyed. So that's obviously a very provocative and troubling commandment, challenging, and something that we've dealt with, any number of times. And then we have, just as a flip side of that, we have a negative commandment. Lo ta'asun kein l'Hashem Elokeichem. Do not do this. Do not do the same kind of thing to God. This is chapter 12, verse 4. And that is a negative commandment, but it is a commandment that's part of the whole package that produces our custom of never destroying anything that has God's name, right? So the Torah portion tells us, destroy all the idol worship stuff. Don't do that with regard to God. So the way that we have, followed through with this is Shemot, right? Anything that has a holy name of God, we can't destroy it. We can't throw it in the garbage. We can't mistreat it. We bury it the way we bury a human being who dies. So that's the basis for that whole practice. Anyway, again, Re'eh talks about the centrality of some place that God will choose. Eventually, historically, that became Jerusalem. That Jerusalem is the one and only place where there can be a temple, where you can offer sacrifices, where you can come to see God, where you must come to see God. But the Jerusalem is not yet designated as that place. Just the Deuteronomy says, Moses says, God will choose a place in the land, and that place has to be revered, and it has to be the center of everything. So that meant that, again, Moses says, don't do what we do now. Now, everybody can do whatever they want, and we were able to offer sacrifices wherever we want. Abraham and Noah and all the people had offered sacrifices wherever. Once we get into the land of Israel, you can't offer sacrifices except in Jerusalem, right? Except in that central place. We had some discussion about that in our Talmud group. I don't want to go into the details. On the other hand, says Moses, the way we work it now in the wilderness is that if you want to eat meat, the only way you could eat meat is by offering some of the meat as a sacrifice, and the rest you ate on your own. That's what's called a shlamim, right? A well-being sacrifice. He says, when you get into the land of Israel, it's not going to be practical. What if you live in Haifa? Right? What if you live in Eilat? You go every time you want to have a meat meal. Monday nights are steak. Okay, so every Monday you're going to have to travel to Jerusalem in order to give a sacrifice of some of the animal to God. So that's the distinction that's first introduced here, that there is sacramental eating of meat and there is profane, mundane, non-sacrificial eating of meat. And it's finally allowed here that no, if you're hungry, just slaughter the animal, another one of the mitzvot that are in this Torah portion, and then eat the meat wherever you are. But there's one thing that has to be taken care of with regard to that dead animal when you slaughter it. What do we have to do with the animal? The blood. The blood cannot be eaten. The blood has to be drained. So that's, of course, a major process within the kashrut procedures that we do. That's what the salting and the soaking and the salting and the draining of the blood. We're not allowed to eat any of the blood. And then we also have, beyond that, I'm skipping a few sections, but later on, Re'eh is one of the major places that has the listings of kosher and non-kosher animals and birds and fish and so on. So kashrut is a big topic in this Torah portion. But before we get to that part of the Torah portion, we have another couple of pretty shaking in your boots when you read them sections. We have the idea of following false prophets, that's dangerous. Watch out, don't follow the false prophets. What do you do to a false prophet? You kill him. So not only are you not allowed to follow them, you're not allowed to let the prophet continue to live. So that's one of these topics. Another topic is, what if it's not a prophet? What if one of your cousins starts talking to you and saying, you know what, I read this really interesting book, I saw this really interesting TV show. It's really pretty, I think, great to worship Baal. Let's worship Baal. I'm convinced that that's a much better religion. So this is somebody who's trying to convince you to abandon God. What do you do to such a person? What?
Put him to death.
Absolutely. So here. So so that's another challenging piece. Then the Torah goes even further. Moses says, what if a whole city decides to secede from the Jewish Israelite union? The Israelite people are devoted to serving God. What if a whole city decides that they're out of here? They want to worship Baal Peor. They want to worship, Asherah. They want to worship, Baal, whatever. What about them? What do you do?
Kill them and their cows.
What?
Kill them and their cows.
So you go to war against them and you wipe them out. Right? So these are very hard-hitting, hard-hearted even, and the Torah says, don't be compassionate. They have to be destroyed. These various kinds of bad influences that will lead you to, abandon God. No, you have to fight them to the death. So that's a whole section in our Torah reading. And then we have a bunch of other laws. And we have the kashrut section, as I said. Then we have other laws about giving gifts to God and to the poor and to the Levite, coming to Jerusalem to celebrate your harvest and your produce. Then we have chapter 15, another addition to what we've already heard about in the book of Exodus and the book of Leviticus, and that's Shemitah, the sabbatical year. So we have more discussion of the sabbatical year here. By the way, Rosh Hashanah will be the beginning of another Shemitah year, another Shvi'it year, another sabbatical year. So in a little more than a month, we begin another sabbatical year. So here we have the discussion. In this Torah reading, they don't talk about not working the land. They don't talk about resting and letting everybody just feel at home in nature. It's the opposite. What we talk about here is economic laws that are meant to reestablish economic equity. And it's about debt cancellation. And there's no two ways about it. The person owes you money, too bad. Once the sabbatical year comes, you can't ask for the money anymore. The debt is dead. So I hear some sounds like some grandmothering going on. So this is the way that the Torah insists that no matter what your contract says, it's too bad. we have an interest in helping poor people stay above water. And it's about an economic, support system, a safety net, to use all of the words that we know about today. And the Torah emphasizes that this is something that you need to watch it. Watch your heart. Don't let your heart become constricted. And here's one place where the Torah thinks about how this mitzvah is going to play out with people. And the Torah says, you may say, you know what? If I'm, not allowed to collect my debts when Shemitah comes, there's one way that I can avoid getting into trouble. I simply won't lend my money to these people. That way I don't have to worry about not getting paid back. And the Torah says, no, you're prohibited from not lending the money. So this is another one of these mitzvot. So that's part of what we go on, and we talk about people that are impoverished. We talk a little bit about slavery. And then we have when you can sacrifice animals to God, and the fact that they have to, the firstborn has to be sacrificed and so on. And then the final piece of the Torah reading is about the 3 pilgrimage festivals. And that's what makes this part of the Torah reading read on different holidays. On Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, this is the festival Torah reading. So anyway, that's not even the whole of it. I skipped over some stuff, but it's a lot. So here we go. Now back to you. Any particular topic? All right, Merle, what do you say?
I don't have a topic, but I have a question. In my book, which is the Jewish Study Bible, at the bottom of chapter 12, they have something they say, and I don't know what this word means, but the chiastic structure.
Right, chiastic
structure of 12, 13 to 19. And then they show it's almost like poetry, A, B, C, C, B, A.
Right.
So is that significant? What is that?
Let's take a look. And this is chapter 13.
Chapter 12.
Chapter 12.
Verse 13 to 19.
13 through 19. So the word chiastic means that it goes in one direction and then it goes backwards. It's a mirror image. That's why it's ABC, CBA, right? Or however many pieces of the process there is, it goes that way, and then it flips around and goes backwards. So that's what chiastic means. So if we look in chapter 12, let's check out and see whether they're really right. What's the subject? The subject is, well, why don't you read it for us and then we'll see. So this is chapter 12, verse 13. This is on page 1065 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. Okay. And Merle, you got your hand raised in your.
Oh yeah, I'm going to lower it now. That's all I wanted to add. It was
Good.
About what I just said. So
let's
lower my
look at
hand.
it.
Okay.
Lower your hand, please. Okay.
I did.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Good. Excellent. Good. Let's hear it.
Oh, should I read it?
Absolutely. It's your idea.
Okay. All right. So take care not to sacrifice your burnt offerings in any place you like, but only in the place that the Lord will choose in one of your tribal territories. There you shall sacrifice your burnt offerings, and there you shall observe all that I enjoin upon you. But whenever you desire, you may slaughter and eat meat in any of your settlements, according to the blessing that the Lord your God has granted you. The unclean and the clean alike may partake of it, as of the gazelle and the deer. But you must not partake of the blood. You shall pour it out on the ground like water. You may not partake in your settlements of the tithes of your new grain or wine or oil, or of the firstlings of your herds and flocks, or of any of the votive offerings that you vow, or of your free will offerings, or of your contributions. These you must consume before the Lord your God in the place that the Lord your God will choose. You and your sons and your daughters, your male and female slaves, and the Levite in your settlements, shall, excuse me, settlements, happy before the Lord your God in all your undertakings. Be sure not to neglect the Levite as long as you live in your land.
Okay,
And
so
that's
this,
it.
okay, so this section of verses that now your commentary says, I'm not going to pull it down. I'm going to let you, lead us through this. They say that this is actually a very consciously constructed set of statements that's meant to take us along a path and then ease us back out of that path, touching the topic in the reverse order. So let's see how that is. Do they lay it out? Which is A, which is B, and so on?
Yep.
Go
So
ahead.
verse 13, the admonition is take care not. So they label that A.
Okay.
Verse
No.
14,
Wait. So, and where's the
Oh.
A plus or the A minus or the reverse A?
the other A.
Yeah.
Oh, the reverse A is chapter 19. It says, be sure not.
The verse 19.
Verse 19. Yeah, I'm sorry, verse 19. But in Hebrew, I mean, they transliterate the Hebrew. The words are the same.
Right. He shamer lecha. He shamer lecha.
So it looks
Right.
the same in Hebrew,
out,
but
watch
the
out.
translation
The
is
translation is a little different. Take care.
in the two A's.
Right.
Take care not and be sure not.
Right. But it's basically the same
So
in
is
Hebrew.
that
So
significant?
those are echoes. Right. So that unfortunately the
I
translation
can't
doesn't
hear
let you
anything.
follow. The translation does not let you follow that kind of
I've lost the
literary.
sound.
I can hear you. You can't hear me. Now you're frozen. All right. Now you're back. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can't hear anything.
What can I tell you? Maybe I can't tell you anything because you can't hear me. What am I supposed to do?
Here, I can hear you now.
Okay,
I lost you.
so the translation doesn't give us that
Sorry.
echoing that we have in the Hebrew. Okay, what's B? B is 14. Go ahead. Now you're frozen again. Okay, what I would suggest, even when, while Merle is trying to fix up her connection there, is that actually the chiasm might start a little bit earlier. Not if we're not looking just at the verbal elements, but the concern for the Levite. We have the concern for the Levite in verse 19. Be sure not to neglect the Levite, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna call in because I keep losing the signal. I'm gonna come
Okay.
in on the phone.
But now let's look at not verse 13. Let's look at verse 12. Who's going to read for us verse 12? Somebody.
What chapter?
Same chapter, 12:12.
It's 144. I'll do it.
Good.
And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God with your sons and daughters, and with your male and female slaves, along with the Levite in your settlements, for he has no territorial allotment among you.
Right. So there the Levi again is included in this overall practice. You have this concern, you want to make a party for your family or something. You can't forget that Levite. The Levite is not part of your family, but the Levite is part of the people of Israel. They don't have their own territory. They don't have their own means of getting food. So everybody has to take care of the Levite. That becomes, again, at the end of 19, be sure not to neglect the Levite, right? No matter how much you're enjoying your food, no matter how much you're doing whatever it is that you're doing to offer sacrifices or not to offer sacrifices, nevertheless, always remember that there are people that need. Okay, Merle, you there? I don't see that she's there. Okay. Does anybody want to try to work out the rest of the chiasm? I think this is her coming in right now. So without the chiasm, let's just focus. What's the message here? What is the Torah trying to say? This is the section that I mentioned before, where the Torah says we have to figure out a way to let people eat meat without having to come to the sanctuary. Right? So this is where we have this distinction. Right? Only in the place, verse 14, only in the place that the Lord will choose, there you shall sacrifice your burnt offerings. There you shall observe all that I command you. So that's the idea of sacrificing only in that one place. Something is echoing. So I know that.
Mel's phone, maybe.
So
Yeah,
all right.
I'd silence
Okay.
my phone.
All right. Welcome back. Then,
Thank
however,
you.
15 says, but. Right?
But
What's the difference? Go ahead.
But whenever you desire, you may slaughter and eat meat of any of your settlements, according to the blessings that the Lord has granted you. The impure and the pure alike may partake of it, as of the gazelle and deer.
Okay, as of the gazelle and deer. Katzvi v'cha'ayal. Okay, that's the Hebrew, the gazelle and the deer. You can, so what's the example that's being given? The gazelle and the deer. Why are they mentioned?
They're not farmed. They're not. They're wild.
Well, they're pretty much wild, but they're kosher.
Right.
Right? So we tend to, most of the animals that we think of as kosher are domesticated animals, but not all. And some domesticated animals are not kosher. Dogs are not kosher, right? Certain birds or whatever may not be kosher. Pigs are not kosher. You can domesticate them. You can grow them in your farm, right? But a gazelle and a deer are kosher. They're not domestic animals. And because they're not domestic animals, they're not eligible to be used as a sacrifice. So the only animals that are eligible for sacrifices without being exhaustive are the domesticated animals of sheep and goats and cows and bulls, right? And then turtle doves and basically those animals. So what the Torah is saying is, remember we allowed you to eat the gazelle and the deer. When you're allowed to eat that, there's no expectation that you should bring some of that animal as a sacrifice to God. They're not eligible. Once they're not eligible to be brought as a sacrifice, then you're free and clear to eat them wherever, whenever you want. So now the Torah says that applies now to all of your food, to all of the meat that you might eat, even the cows, even the goats. In the past, if you wanted to eat in the desert, in the wilderness, if you wanted to eat a goat, you had to bring the goat as a sacrifice. If you wanted to eat steak, you had to bring the animal as a sacrifice. And then a little bit of the animal would go on the altar. Some of it would go to the priests, and the rest of it would go to you. Now the Torah says, well, once you're living in places all over the Holy Land, we're going to let you eat any food that you want, any meat that you want, as long as it's not a sacrifice, right? That's the actual paradox. If you make it a sacrifice, you better not make it a sacrifice outside Jerusalem. But if you don't want to make it a sacrifice and you just want to eat it yourself, you just want to have a barbecue, then great. And what's another example of how this is not the way the sacrificial system works? You can be impure. When it comes to eating sacrifices, you can only be pure. If you're impure, you're not allowed to eat the sacrifices. Here it says, hatamei v'hatahor, right? Yochlenu katzvi v'chaya. Whether you're pure or impure, it doesn't matter, because it's not holy. So here's where the Torah is actually making this very, very clear distinction between behavior, practices, the same eating, the same chewing, I can eat an animal and it can be a totally non-sacrificial act, no service to God, or it can be an act where it has to be in the sacred shrine, it has to abide by all these kinds of rules and so on. So the only two rules that we have in the Torah that have to be abided by is slaughtering and no blood. Everything else is open. What have we done subsequently in Jewish history and Jewish tradition? What have we done to sort of make regular mundane eating more holy, more special, more dedicated to God? That doesn't say, and it doesn't say anything here about it. Yeah, David Kanigis.
We make a bracha before eating.
Right. So that's we had it back last week. We had the idea of thanking God after you eat, but we created a new system that was much more elaborate, and we say, no, you know what? Let's have blessings before you eat. Remind yourself that even though you're eating outside of Jerusalem, there's no sacred commandments that you have to follow. I'm taking on a sacred commandment anyway. I'm going to thank God and bless God for giving me this food. So we say these blessings. What else do we do? Anything else? Any other practices that we've added to make this a little more sacred? Okay, Geraldine. Wait, Geraldine. Yeah.
We wash our hands.
We wash our hands for bread, right? We don't have to wash our hands otherwise, although the custom practice used to be that anything that would get wet, we should wash our hands so that we shouldn't make them impure, right? Things that get wet become impure if they touch something impure. So it used to be we washed our hands for all kinds of things, but now we only wash our hands for bread. But that washing of the hands, again, is a purity act. Here the Torah says specifically, you can be impure, I don't care. Eat the food, you want to eat the food as much as you want. However much you want. Be impure. And we said, no, you know what? We want our hands to be pure. So there's a whole, latitude that the Torah gives us. And we said, you know what? Thank you very much, but we want to make it special some more. Merle, you wanted to add some stuff.
Oh, I was going to just talk about the washing hands. When you asked, what else do we do? I said washing hands.
Good. There's another practice that we have to put salt on the table. So some people are aware of this, like when you make hamotzi, a lot of people then take the salt shaker and they splash salt over all of the bread and they give it out to everybody. That's not necessarily required. And for people who who don't eat salt or who don't like salt, you're not doing anybody a favor by doing that. You should let people put the salt on their own without doing it together. Put a salt on your own piece of bread if you want salt on your bread. But the truth is that according to the practice I follow, you don't need to put the salt on the food. The salt has to be on the table. The salt has to be present. Why is the salt present? Just to give people a heart attack because they can't have it, if they're on a low sodium diet? Why is the salt there? Because the salt was on the altar. And therefore we want to have a memorial to the altar. All of the sacrifices brought on the altar had salt. So, Chol korbancha takriv melach. Al kol korbancha takriv melach. So, having salt is reminiscent of the altar. This is where the rabbi said, now that we don't have a temple, now that we don't have that shrine anymore, where do we have the altar? The answer is every table where we eat is an altar. We turn our tables into holy places, into holy instruments of eating. Right? The idea that eating is something, I'm famished, I gotta eat. Remember Esav? give me some of that soup. Otherwise, I'm gonna just like plots right here. So eating obviously is something that is super basically human, life and death in the ultimate sense. And yet we sanctify it. We take this extra wiggle room that the Torah gave us, and we narrowed it, and we added other elements. We say, thank you very much for giving us the permission to do it just any old way. But you know what? We're going to make it more holy. We're going to make it more mindful. We're going to make it less animalistic, less physical, and more conscious in the way we do things. And of course, the blood is mentioned here again. Do not eat the blood. Why not? Why don't we eat the blood? Because the Torah says so. Okay, that's good. But the Torah has other places where the Torah talks about the blood.
Purity.
What?
Purity.
Why? What about purity?
Blood is tuma.
But it says here that we don't care. You can be impure and eat the food.
It's still.
And blood is not tumah. Blood, for instance, in the temple, you take the blood of the sacrifice and you splash it on the altar. The altar doesn't become impure because of that. So, on Yom Kippur, what do? We take the blood and we sprinkle it on the curtain to go into the Holy of Holies. We sprinkle it there. So it's not, the blood is not considered in those contexts a source of tumah. Death is a source of tumah, but killing the animals in the sanctuary is not a source of tumah. Geraldine, yeah.
Isn't blood a symbol of life?
Yes. Ki hadam hu hanefesh. The Torah says because blood is the soul force, the life of the creature, and not just human beings, but also animals. So we have all the way back in Noah's time, where the Torah says, do not spill blood. Blood is the essence of the life force of a person. Then later on, the Torah says about the animals themselves, you must take the blood, don't eat it. And what must you do?
Pour it like water.
So it says here, al haaretz tishbechenu kamayim. Pour it onto the earth, onto the dirt, like water. Right? You should pour it on the ground like water. That's the translation I have. What does that mean, like water? What would be so terrible? Would it be unclear? We wouldn't understand what the Torah means if it says, and pour it out on the ground. Period.
Not into a receptacle, I guess.
What? Say that again?
Not into a receptacle, I guess.
Pour it onto the ground. So right. So we're saying it's not going to go into a receptacle. You're not going to, collect it. You're not going to make blood pudding out of it. Yum, yum, yum. But people like it. Some people eat it. So people like a steak that's really bloody and juicy. People have that idea that it's tasty, but no, you got to pour it out on the ground. But like water, that comparison is very interesting. It comes back to Geraldine's point. What are our associations with water? Back to Alan's point. Our associations with water are purity. Right? Our associations with water are life. How do we actually become pure if we ended up becoming impure? How do we purify ourselves? We immerse ourselves in water, right? Because water is the source of life. And here, the Torah says, this animal that you killed, take its life force, the blood that kept it alive, and pour it onto the ground, just like water, which is a source of life. It's like returning the life back into the earth. This is, a kind of way of acknowledging, again, back to Noah's time, that you're allowed to do this. The Torah says, you want to eat meat, gesundheit, b'chol avat nafshecha, as much as you want, with certain limitations. But recognize that you're killing, right? Recognize that you've taken life. and collect that life and pour it back into the earth where it came from. So this is a very consciousness raising act. We add more to that, and we say we cover the blood so that the earth not just is the receptacle of the blood, but it ends up covering the blood like we bury a human being. Yeah, Merle.
This is, triggering another thought. So do Jewish people who keep kosher ever have rare meat, rare steak?
Yes.
I would see you can't do that.
Well, you can, except it's all relative. Yeah, Beryl.
I was going to say that my grandfather, who owned a non-kosher restaurant, a seafood restaurant, but had opinions on kosher and might have been kosher himself a bit, said that as long as the meat has been taken care of however they take care of, it can be prepared in whatever manner. So there's a certain amount of blood that's taken out with salt and stuff before it's sold as kosher in this country, mostly.
Right, and not just in this country, everywhere. The process of salting and soaking the meat takes out a good proportion of the blood, but it doesn't take out 100%. You'd have to get some kind of vacuum cleaner, thing to completely empty every single vein and every single capillary. There's tons and tons of blood stuck in the meat, but the flowing blood is extracted in a number of ways, right? Like I said, the soaking, the salting sucks out some of the blood. You put it on a tray, so you let gravity work a little bit so that the blood actually flows out. But then whatever is left after that is considered okay. So a non-kosher piece of meat will be, at least could be, much, 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 much more full of blood than a kosher piece of meat. But in terms of the rare and so on and so forth, if you don't cook it, you'll still have a much, juicier, piece of steak. Yeah, Alan.
I was gonna say, if we're reminiscing like Beryl, I remember growing up, my mother always had a different pan for liver and a different fork for liver, because that way when the blood came down, it wasn't affecting the other pots and pans that she used for other types of meat, because there was a higher level of blood that was retained in the liver. And I actually liked it back then, but she made it nice. But
right.
Just in the reminiscing sense of where do you have the bloods and not bloods, the thought process of what goes through the preparation.
Right. I mean, liver is a sponge of blood. It's like saturated, completely with blood. And a liver actually can't be kosher the same way as regular meat. It has to be broiled.
Right.
It has to be, the blood has to be burnt out of it, before it can be eaten. So, because it's so concentrated with the blood. All right. So what we're seeing here is that the Torah, on the one hand, gives concessions to how we want to eat and how we want to get on with our lives. But then the Torah also pushes back a little bit and says, okay, I'm going to give you some concessions, but on certain conditions, right? There's certain extra things you need to be aware of. So one thing is, like I said, the blood, and the idea also, which we got a little bit later, is don't forget the poor. The Levite is obviously a ritual category of people. They're the people that are supposed to be on call to work in the temple. But wherever they are, they don't have a source of support, economic support. You are their source of support. Whenever you're doing this stuff, make sure that you remember them. Okay. Merle, you want to, Beryl.
I feel like I've been places where meat is sold as kosher because it was killed ritually but then you are responsible for salting it on 6 sides or something like that.
Right, right. Yes, that was the old way. That was the common way in the past. In the old days, back, let's say in my mother's days, the early part of my mother's days, it was usual that the butchers basically made sure that the animal was slaughtered and that the blood was drained, from the neck and so on and so forth. That's slaughtering. Also, that's one of the things about slaughtering, is that you don't shoot it in the belly. You slaughter it where the blood vessels are in the neck, and it empties out the blood as much as possible. But then they would sell the meat with the understanding that the person at home would salt it and soak it and drain it. And that was a whole practice that was passed on mostly from mother to mother, from mother to daughter, and it was understood that was on you. It was up to you to do that. Yeah, Geraldine.
In 1934, my mother went when she was just in high school, went with my grandfather back to Hungary to get his sister and her family to come here. They were the only ones of the family still there. Anyway, when they were there, one of the things that they questioned her about to make sure that my grandfather and my grandmother had taught her properly, my grandmother had died a few months before, was on how many sides do you salt the meat when you kosher it? And she knew the answer because she had done it with her mother's on 6 sides. So they were convinced that she had been taught properly.
Right.
Mm.
There you go. Good. That's it.
So when she was a little girl, they did it at home.
Right.
And it was obviously, it was a big procedure.
Right. So this was part of modernization. And this was part of, becoming much more sophisticated. And, you get a washing machine instead of washing your clothes. You get a dishwasher instead of washing your dishes. So the idea of industrializing, koshering became a big deal. And then the idea was, no, let's have all the meat already koshered and packaged. And then, no trouble, no fuss, no muss. And then, so on the one hand, it's so much more convenient. On the other hand, a whole, practice is forgotten. The traditions get lost. So they're only done by the specialists. People that still sell that today are walking through in a very, tricky kind of way. Because I remember, again, maybe this was like 30 years ago, there were butchers in Brooklyn that advertised that their meat was kosher because it was slaughtered kosher and so on, but they didn't soak and salt it. So unless you paid attention, if you just walked in and you assumed, well, I've been buying meat that, and it's always been kosher, so I want to buy kosher meat. And then you buy this, this meat, and you don't read the fine print where it says not soaked and salted. If you don't read that print, you go, oh yeah, this is kosher meat. And then you cook it up and you eat it. And you didn't realize that they didn't do that work that you assumed that they did. It's much less common these days. It's almost, it's almost unheard of to sell the meat without koshering and salting the meat now. So times they change. All right, we're gonna stop here. And I want to wish everyone a good week.
You too.
Sei gesund und stark. Stopping recording.